Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated T for Teen.
In my line of work, I meet a lot of interesting people who have had fascinating careers, few perhaps quite as fascinating as our guest today. Hello, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. And if you don't know, Full Comment is part of Postmedia. Postmedia owns the Toronto Sun, the National Post, dailies and regionals and weeklies across the country. And we've got it's not really a retrospective because he's not retiring, but he is leaving an official role with the company. Paul Godfrey was the CEO and founder of Postmedia for many years. Then he was chair of the board. And now he is just off on his own as a private citizen doing his own thing. We'll hear a bit about that. But Paul, I wanted to take time and chat with you because you and I have chats at the office, in the background, when we see each other at social events. And I think you've had a fascinating career. I think you're a fascinating guy. But you're not in the media too often, so people don't get to hear about it. So this is why I thought, for the end of the year, as you're officially leaving Postmedia in an official capacity, let's sit down and have a chat.
Absolutely.
So before we get into, way back in time, let's talk about the founding of Postmedia because you've had a career in politics, you've had a career in business, you helped bring the Blue Jays to Toronto back in the 1970s, all these things. But just other than a time where you ran the Sun and Sun Media, you weren't really a media guy. And then you did that for a while for Rogers. And then you show up and you create a brand new media company. How did you put together and tell me about the starting of Postmedia, taking all these different outlets, putting them together, distressed assets, and founding a new company that, well, let's face it, a lot of people read and a lot of people love to hate.
There's no doubt about that.
Well, if people aren't hating you, you're probably boring.
I felt the arrows, man.
So tell me about the start of that and pulling this all together.
Well, it seemed that there was an opportunity to put a group together, a group of newspapers across the country. And you may remember that a number of the organizations were held by the families in the West, mostly in Manitoba. And it seemed that they wanted to get out of the newspaper business and do other things. And it felt like a good opportunity for us to sort of put them all together, knit them all. The Edmonton area, the Calgary, ones in British Columbia. And it seemed like a natural fit. And we decided to visit all the areas, speak to the communities in those areas, and tell them that we're going to build something called Postmedia. And it seemed to work. And in the year 2010, we really had it all together. There was ups and downs, and trying to put it together. There was disputes. We had to deal with a lot of the people that had some concern about will this be giving Toronto too much power in the rest of the city? And I tried to tell them that a lot of the news that is covered in all those cities, it was all generated in Toronto to begin with. So we were able to get it together, and I think 2010 we created Post Media. I felt that was one of my victories in the newspaper era, and we were quite proud. And I think today, when you look back over your shoulder and see what happened, I think the columnists that we have, you and others that helped make Post Media the great success. Right now, things have changed dramatically in all newspapers, and you have to be very careful on how the future is going to look like.
Well, it's going to say, I mean, the media landscape has changed tremendously from 2010. Would you do it all again if you had to do it over? It's been a lot of ups and downs. The company, by the way, folks don't realize this, but the company's in good hands and in a good position now. Our detractors would like to say otherwise, but it's we're not going out of business anytime. But it is a very different landscape than it was when you started this.
There is no doubt about that. Since 2010, Google and Facebook and others came in to be major competitors. And there's no doubt trying to hide that because a lot of people went to the digital world, and things in the digital world exist today. And it's taken a lot of business away from the newspaper business. I think that you got to look back to 2010 or even the era before that, and 80% of their revenues came from advertising on newsprint.
Mm-hmm.
Since that time,
the old Dead Tree edition.
That's right, and since that time, things have shrunk to an unbelievable level, and a lot of those newspapers are gone or on a slippery slope at the present time. And I don't think there's any way of hiding that.
Well, I mean, to give people an idea of how things changed, when the Toronto Sun, and the Sun, by the way, has always, for a long time been bigger than just the Toronto Sun. You've got the papers in Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, but also all the old Osprey papers, the London Free Press, the Kingston Whig Standard. That was all part of the Sun. And in the late 90s, the Sun got sold. Were you still at the Sun when it got sold to Quebecor?
No, I got bought out as one of the, by the Sun. I had the pleasure of dealing with Pierre-Carl Pelado.
So Pelado buys the Sun to stop a takeover from the Toronto Star. Pelado pays about $1 billion, or just over $1 billion. When Post Media buys the Sun and all those other papers, basically Pelado's English media empire in 2015, the price was $300 million.
That is correct.
I mean,
we bought our paper back. We sold it at a huge price, and it was what you call a lovely deal at the time to sell it, and basically they got tired of it, and we bought it back at a very great dollar at the time.
Let's talk about how one of the criticisms that I've heard, more in my days with Quebecor and helping run the Ottawa Bureau up there, you would hear from people and say, well, there's too much media concentration, and we used to have a local paper that was all local, and it would be doing great if these guys hadn't bought it. Without the consolidation, I would say, and the argument I made to them back at the time for a lot of the smaller regional dailies was, if it wasn't for the consolidation, you wouldn't have a newspaper in your town of 20,000.
There's no doubt about that. There was a slippery slope that started. And we had to recognize that newspapers were in trouble. And that's why some of them did disappear, and some of them were merged with others to make sure that they had an opportunity to get their community covered with news. And our responsibility was to spread that news that took place, whether it was in Montreal or Toronto or Ottawa or their communities. And if there was a big story that took place in Calgary or Edmonton or Vancouver, we ran that across the country because that was essential. That was news. And a lot of people recognize that even though they won't admit that the big news starts in Toronto, that's reality.
Well, it is, and also, if you're getting the product from of what happens in Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver sent to your local paper, then you can focus on local. And I would argue that we've done that successfully under both iterations of the company that I've worked for, because otherwise these papers would long be gone. Do you have a view as you leave the media world of where things are going? Obviously, it's digital, but do you see things changing, or how do you see things changing in the coming years?
Well, I think, like everything else, it's going to be a slow change, and has been a slow change to date. But I still think that there is room for major stories, international stories. I think, for instance, the Toronto Sun and the National Post are two of the major operations that really cover North America for us. And you have to be proud. And I think that from an interest point of view, I think the National Post is the most sought out paper in Canada today. We break stories all over. The Sun breaks stories, and I think the fact that they both operate in the same building, and sure, lots of news comes in days like today from Ottawa, because things are. You can bet that everybody's reading news about Ottawa all over Canada and probably much of the world.
Well, I would definitely argue that we've got the strongest stable of columnists and the most interesting columnists within the company. Let's talk about your career, though, because you didn't start out as a business guy. You were a good boy who decided that he had to go get a degree in something that you've never practiced. So how did a guy who started out studying chemical engineering it was U of T, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, okay, so how does a good Jewish kid from Toronto who starts out studying chemical engineering end up becoming a politician, a baseball commissioner, and then eventually a media magnate?
Well, that's quite interesting. I openly admit, a lot of people say, why do you tell people that you weren't a good student in school? I says, because I wasn't a good student in school, and I wasn't going to make up things about it that gave me. I struggled through school. I think I probably started school several months before I should have started school. And it slowed down my growth. And as time went on, I began to worry. I said, what am I really going to do in life? And I used to wander around University of Toronto, figuring out, geez, what am I going to ever take? And it seemed that the best place for me was to get a degree in chemical engineering, because chemistry seemed to be the best of some bad products that I was studying.
Was it kind of like The Graduate, where somebody just took you aside and said, plastics, boy, plastics? Yeah, that's the future.
That's pretty well thing. That seems to be the easiest one to get into, and but at the end of it, I remember sitting around writing my final exam and gazing into the future. And one of the supervisors asked me, "Are you okay? Are you having trouble with the exam?" I says, "No, somehow I worked my way through it, but I'm really not sure I want to be a chemical engineer." And that was after 4 years, last exam. And I think I shocked a lot of people at the time. For years afterwards, I came back to speak to students who were going to take chemical engineering, and I told them what I was going through. And I think the best thing that ever happened to me was having a mother that was interested in local politics. And I even said to her, I says, Mom, I know you helped me through school and being an engineer, but I don't think I'm going to last that way. So my family switched gears. I got the opportunity of having a mother who knew how to run a political campaign, and I got elected for my first shot.
How old were you?
25.
25. Okay, so it's just a bit older than Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader, when he got elected. When I first met, he was 24.
Yeah.
Just out of school.
And somehow, was I a little nervous? Yes, I had to stand up and give speeches as a guy that had little confidence in themselves at the time.
That's tough to believe, Paul.
And well, you know what? It's an app. People have asked me to write books about that, and I said, you know what? At one time, I will write a book, but right now, too many of those people are still alive. And
So, what did you get elected to at age 25?
I
Dog
got
catcher?
elected to the North York Council and to one of the local wards in the Bathurst Wilson area, and I sort of after spending about 2 months there, sort of got a lot more confidence of dealing with people that were significantly older than I was, and I sort of became North York's angry young man at a very young age, and I was very fortunate. I got
So this is pre-amalgamation Toronto by decades.
way pre.
What year is this?
That would be 1965, 66.
Okay, so you get elected to North York Council. You are the angry young man for the area. I remember when I was that age, and I'd be going into meetings with people, and they would look at me and they'd be kind of dismissive because you're so young. And I remember I was in a meeting with my boss. We were doing a presentation somewhere, and they said, "Oh, it's so nice that you hire such young people." And I thought, okay, I'm growing a beard. Did you do anything like that to look older? Because once I grew the beard, nobody commented on my age in meetings.
Oh, I became the chairman of Metropolitan Toronto when I was 34 years of age, which was a few years after my first, and I seemed to get better as time went on in the eyes of the public. And though I became outspoken, and I took on things that maybe I shouldn't have taken on. And
Well, let's remind people what Metro Toronto Council was, because it's been several decades since it was around.
that is correct.
So you were first elected to North York Council, and back then the city was not amalgamated, and so there was this regional government on top. It was like a super council above all the local councils, right?
That is correct. There was
So how did you go from Bathurst and Seals guy to chair of Metro Council?
well, you know what? It was kind of a lucky situation, being in the right spot at the right time. One of the counselors unfortunately passed away on a heart attack, and I was chosen by the rest of the council to move into that position, which gave me a position on the upper level.
So you became both a local councillor and a regional councillor.
That's right, at the same time. And
Which still happens in places that have that form of government.
that is correct. And I then became very involved in major issues affecting the city of Toronto. And when Ab Campbell, who was the chairman of Metro Toronto, unfortunately passed away, I decided this was an opportunity to try and do it all. And I was fortunate of winning. There was 24 members of the council. North York, the city had 12 of them, and the rest of the municipalities that made it had one each. And I was able to convince them to give me a shot at running the major operation of Toronto. And I was 34 at the time, and I know that was kind of young, but everything seemed to fall the right way for me.
34 and running what was effectively back then the mega city. That is pretty impressive.
There was a lot of fun things to do.
And Toronto was growing by leaps and bounds at the time. And the city was changing rapidly. So you're in there at the time when basically Toronto was not Canada's premier city at that time. It was still Montreal. But
that is true.
The whole separatist movement was taking off, and it is before my time, but I'm old enough to remember growing up down the road in Hamilton. You had all these areas that grew dramatically as people, especially the English community, fled Quebec, fled Montreal, and Burlington grew dramatically, Oakville, but Toronto did as well and became the hub. What was it like having all these companies like Bank of Montreal suddenly building First Canadian Place and having their name secretly changed to First Canadian Bank in case Quebec separated, things like that? I mean, what was it like running the city back then?
Well, you know what? It was quite challenging because everybody wanted to have a say in it, and I think the fact is that the way the provincial government put Toronto together and said there's going to be one super mayor, we're going to call him the chairman of Metropolitan Toronto, and we're going to have 6 municipalities. They started off at 12, and common sense said too many municipalities, too many politicians, too many delays, and too much false spending. And when it became closer to the time in the 1970s, the Ab Campbell, who was the super mayor of the time, called the chairman of Metropolitan Toronto, unfortunately had cancer, and he died after he served one term. And I was fortunate enough to be appointed by the colleagues. You've got to remember, I was not appointed by the public. The councillors that made up Metro, the municipalities, gave me the opportunity.
Did you ever get elected chair by the public, or did they decide they'd had enough of you?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I've only had 2 elections by the public, and both of them were in North York. And when it got to Metro, and the province decided to go from Big Daddy Gardner, who the Gardner Expressway is still named after, and finally, when Ab took over as the chairman, I became his successor afterwards, and I had the privilege of running Toronto for 11 years, and it was great fun. I had a lot of people that would criticize me of the things that I would do, but I could always stand in front of them and basically defend what I was trying to, including trying to bring Major League Baseball to Toronto.
Okay, well, this is a good time to take a break, and when we come back, I want to hear about bringing the Blue Jays to Toronto, because it's quite the story. Paul Godfrey with us here on Full Comment. Back in moments.
Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated T for Teen.
It's tough to imagine Toronto without the Blue Jays now, or the Raptors, the Leafs, or any of these big sports teams that help define the city in so many ways, but they didn't always exist. And Paul Godfrey, you were there for bringing the Blue Jays to Toronto. Montreal already had a team in the Expos. How did this come about? Was it an idea of the city? Was it an idea of the original owners, Labatt's? Take us through that, the founding of a Major League Baseball team.
Well, when I became chairman of Metropolitan Toronto, the Expos did exist, and Jean Drapeau and his group there did a fabulous job in making Montreal the dominant city in Canada. And I figured, gee, we're not shoplifter, and I'm going to try and get something to happen. And I said, well, we've got to get a baseball team because we both got hockey teams, and other teams will come forward. And I started on my own volition to go to Major League Baseball meetings that the existing teams met with once or twice a year. And I went.
So you're just showing up at like the winter meetings in Florida or something?
That's right. I wasn't invited. Down. I bought beer for some of the people who were hanging around the hotels, and I remember saying to people, like I said, look, my name is Paul Godfrey. I represent Toronto. At that time, really didn't represent Toronto. I represented North York. And I said, look, I want to get a Major League Baseball team. And they said to me, where are you going to play? And I bumped into Bowie Kuhn, who was the commissioner of baseball at the time. And we met, and I went up to him and I said to him, Commissioner, I said, my name is Paul Godfrey. I want to get a Major League Baseball team in Toronto. And he looked down, and he was about 6'5", I think, at the time. And I felt quite a bit shorter than him. And he said to me, well, where are you going to play? Oh, I said, don't worry about that. I'll get it built. If you give us a team, I will get the stadium built. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, son, let me tell you the way baseball works. First, you build the stadium, and then come back and see me, and then we'll decide if Toronto should get a team or not. I said that was so deflating to me, and there were a lot of people who were listening and watching. I came back to Toronto, and I said to them, look, we've got to do something. We've got to build a better stadium than we have. It doesn't have to be the biggest stadium, but we've got to have something which we can call home. And I got the municipal council, Metro, to give me $15 million. I went to see Bill Davis at Queen's Park, and I knew that he loved the expansion of Ford, of a team in Toronto. And he basically said to me, look, it's hard for me to give you money when you don't have a stadium and you don't have any recognition that there will even give you a charity here. So I kept hammering him at the time. And finally he got tired of basically.
He got annoyed listening to you.
To listen to me. When you go knock on somebody's door, but you're polite at the same time, and said, oh, trouble's here again. And he said, look, I can't give you another $15 million that your city council gave you, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you a loan, and I want you to sign something that will indicate that you're going to repay the loan. Therefore, the people of the province all have some guarantee. So I took the funny thing is, nobody said it was going to be the Metro signing or Paul Godfrey signing. I just signed it. and lo and behold, as time went on, Major League Baseball said, look, we should be expanding. We should be taking on other cities. And we were lucky enough to get a seat. We had to make lots of commitments. And when I got inducted into the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame this year, in last June, I told a story about never paying the loan back that I did all those years earlier. When I got back after the induction, I got a call from Doug Ford, And Doug said to me, "Word has it that you owe the province $15 million."
Plus interest.
I said, "Yeah, that may be true. I figure I'll have to find out a way of paying it." He laughed. He says, "No, look, after all this period of time, we'll tear up the amount that you owe." And
If anyone could find the agreement still.
that's quite true. But it went well because the people of Toronto really wanted. I did have some people that argued the point that why is Godfrey building a new building and spending all this money? And baseball's an American game. We don't want an American game, and that even gave me more drive. And it got proven that the people did want to see a major league team in
And
Toronto.
there's an argument that Canadian baseball is a Canadian game as well. St. Mary's,
For sure.
Ontario.
For sure. But you'll always find people that want to stop you and take shots at you. In any event, the thing worked out really well. We knew we had to build a new stadium, and there were enough people and business step forward. And
So that was eventually the Dome, or what's now Rogers Centre, but they played for 20 years at Exhibition Stadium. I'm guessing there was a lot of work that went into getting that ready for Major League
yes,
Baseball.
so we didn't have the luxury of building something that big, but thank goodness to the major corporations. I knocked on a lot of doors and got each of them to commit $5 million, and we ended up with about 35 of them. So,
How did you find an owner for the team? Because sure, you're going down there lobbying for the city to get a team, but somebody has to own it.
Well, that, believe it or not, it came that there was going to be a number of owners at the beginning. Each one was going to own a percentage and get a private box, but they all had to come up with $5 million. Doesn't sound a lot when you consider what baseball makes today.
Yeah.
But back in the 1970s, and we finally got a team in 1975, 76. We came through and got $5 million all the time, and it helped us open the door to build what we now call the Rogers Centre. But a lot of people got ownership on a piece of it. So we did it, and it became an effort, and we owe a lot of thanks to a lot of people who put the money up, and what they got for it was McDonald's got the facilities to supply hot dogs and food there. The Major League we got help from the car companies. Each car company gave us $5 million, and when they all wanted to not be left out, we were able to put enough money together to do it. And
if I'm correct, one of the original companies in the ownership group was Labatt, right?
that is correct.
So
They were right at the beginning.
Tell me about convincing a brewery to put $5 million in to be one of the owners, and you can't sell beer at the games because that wasn't allowed back then.
No, that's correct, and it went on for about 4 or 5 years that no beer could be used at the stadium at all. But Labatt's and their ownership at that time, you have to congratulate all those people at the time. They deserve a big salute.
And they're still very much tied to the Blue Jays now.
Yeah, the fact is that people remember that. But at the time we were raising money, we said to most of the corporations they're going to be one of a kind. And it seemed that when Labatt's moved in, Molson's complained, "Hey, we want to be there as well." We don't, because they knew eventually beer would be served there.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us a few years, and I had a knock on the doors of the commissioner again, and Bowie Kuhn was the most helpful guy once the doors were open, and we ended up with the three breweries on there, and it really caught on like fire. And if somebody would have told me in 1967 that I would be involved in bringing a Major League Baseball team, I'd be involved in getting a stadium built like that, I would have said that that's a dream that can only come true in the movies. And that happened.
And then you got hired away. I believe it was Doug Creighton from The Sun went to you, correct?
That is right. After being doing and completing what I was able to do, I was a big fan of the Toronto Sun, and when he phoned me and said, "I'd like to have lunch with you," and he said, "How would you like to be the publisher of the Toronto Sun?" And I said, "Doug," I said, "I want to tell you something. I don't know a lot about the newspaper business." And he said to me, "You didn't know a lot about baseball either, but you somehow took that job." And that thing was consistent after a time when I went and joined Ted Rogers, and he wanted me to be involved in his company. And I said the same. I have no experience. He says, "Don't give me this no experience thing." He says, "You had no experience when you took over the city of Toronto." He says, "And I want you to come and join me."
Well, you've told me before that you were at the Sun when Rogers ended up being the owner. And Rogers, of course, now owns the Blue Jays. They're about to own all the other sports teams. Ted Rogers' son, Ed,
Yes.
running the show now. But you've told me that Ted Rogers was the smartest person you ever worked for and very demanding. And I believe it was, the Sun was always buy it at the Subway, buy it at the corner store, buy it in the newspaper box. It wasn't home delivery. And he comes to you one day and says, "I want home delivery, and it's going to start," I forget the timeline you gave me, but it was pretty quick.
A week later.
A week later.
Yeah. Well, the Sun sold their newspapers at the boxes. Where you'd go along the street, you'd throw in your 25 cents or 50 cents at the time and take a newspaper. And we knew that certain people took the newspaper and didn't deliver anything financially. But Doug said, "Look, we got such a good opportunity to make money if we deliver it every day." And I tried to convince Doug at the time that was very expensive and we wouldn't make money. And he says, "Don't tell me how to make money." He says, "I've made a lot of money over the years." And he says,
This is Ted Rogers?
Ted Rogers telling me. And he says, "You deliver those papers, you got 2 weeks to get it done." And I said, Ted, please, I tell you, you'll fire me if I go ahead with it for not being able to convince you of doing it. I said, "Give me 2 weeks. I'll write the report. We'll get the financial people involved in it." And I sent it to him. And to this day, I never got a reply. So he must have thought it was. And I got to tell you, he was a brilliant guy, and he was a good guy to work with. He had a bad temper, but I got to tell you, he had great respect from me and from the people that worked for him, because he was strong in his views. He stuck his to it, and most of the time he hit a home run. And delivering papers to people at home was not a home run to him. And he was always a great guy that would never disallow you to try and change his mind.
Back then, newspapers made money hand over fist. I remember going into the old offices at 333 Kane East for the Sun, and there was this big leather couch and a couple of matching chairs, and when you sat on them, it smelled of cigars. and I said to the guy whose office I was in, I said, "How old are these couches? Where'd they come from?" And the story that he told me was that Creighton back in the 80s was down in Washington, and he drops by someone who has this couch. It was the ambassador at the Canadian Embassy. And he said, well, where'd you get that? He said, oh, I got it at this shop. Before he flies out, he drops into the shop, orders this couch set to be delivered to Toronto for $40,000 US at the time. They couldn't spend the money fast enough back in the day. And so even though Creighton's long gone and regime changed multiple times, no one wanted to get rid of this couch because it was so expensive. And it still smelled of cigars because back then there was a lot of smoking going on in those offices.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And I got to tell you, another reason why they didn't want to get rid of that was Ted's gift. And
Wow.
And I got to tell you that I did have face-to-face differences with Ted. And there were times I went home and I would say to my wife, I'm not sure I'm going to have a job tomorrow morning. and because we would have, face-to-face arguments. And the next morning, the phone would ring and my assistant said, Mr. Rogers is on the phone. I said, oh, here it comes. Here it really comes. And I'd say, good morning, Ted. How are you today? He says, Paul, wasn't that a great meeting we had yesterday? I sort of took a look at the phone and said, was I at the same meeting as Ted? But he was like that. He would really challenge what you were doing, and he respected you. If you had to put it quite openly, you had the balls to stand up to him. And I respected him. Unfortunately, I watched him pass away. I think it was December several years ago. And he was a difficult guy to work for, but a great leader.
You, as we said at the beginning, you're leaving Post Media in any official capacity, but you're not retiring because, well, guys like you, guys like me, what's retirement? You got to keep moving, and you're staying busy. You've moved into a new office. Tell us what you're up to now.
Well, first of all, I've got a great interest in what's happening in the city of Toronto, and I'll tell you in a moment exactly what I'm doing now, but I am very troubled by what Toronto is going through. I think Toronto is a city in decay right now. And I hate to say
Absolutely.
that. I really hate to say that because the city that I was involved in and helped build was one that had police force that had safety attached to it. City Hall had positive things, not bike lanes in the whole city, killing it, the ability to get around, having to get calls from guests that come to Toronto say, "What the heck is happening to Toronto?" It is tear jerking, to be quite honest with you. And people are going to get shocked in Toronto when they find out how many people are in the area of moving to the U.S., having their kids go to school in the U.S., crime that takes place in our city. We don't have enough police for it. So
Paul, I have traveled the world this last year. I've been to Glasgow and Edinburgh, Chicago, L.A., Palm Springs, Tampa, Phoenix, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. None of these cities are as dirty and messed up as Toronto, and none of them smell like pot constantly. We now have a dirty, dysfunctional city that reeks of pot.
No, that is absolutely true. And to hear people and the fear of crime. I can't tell you how many days a week that I get stopped when I'm out walking my dog at either early in the morning or late at night, that people say, why don't you go back into politics? I says, well, first of all, little age problems in the way of that. However, there is no doubt that there is great fear in the minds of people. This is the administration at City Hall, led by the mayor, are not doing the job that the people expect.
No, definitely not.
Now, with respect to what I'm doing now is I'm working for my son, which is He operates a company called Keel. He's very involved in looking after the kids that go to school in colleges and university. He's picked up training in artificial intelligence, and they've done such a superb job in looking after the kids that had COVID problems and have missed 2 years of their life. And through him hiring the right type of people, they had gone through great project in helping these young people. He's also doing similar work with police officers. When a police officer gets hurt, a lot of them won't admit that they're hurt because they need their jobs and things like that. And he's doing the same thing with Keel, and I'm beginning to pick up small bits and pieces of it and help open doors for him because of my profile in Toronto throughout the years.
Well, as I knew that you wouldn't be just sitting back and resting. You've had an incredible career so far, and I'm sure it's just going to continue. Paul, thanks so much for the time today.
Delighted to be with you. Thank you.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. You can subscribe to Full Comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube podcasts now, wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe, leave a review, give us a rating, and tell your friends about us. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.